All right, welcome everyone to Musicians for Musicians presents Music is Essential, Zoom webinar number 9 with Banning Eyre, speaking on expanding our conception of guitar in Africa. So for those of you that are new to our organization, Musicians for Musicians, MFM seeks to bring together musicians of all kinds in the cause of their mutual self-betterment and to elevate their work to the level of a true profession. So today, continuing from a previous demonstration that he did on a previous Zoom webinar. We have Banning Eyre returning. He has a brand new CD, which was reviewed by fellow MFM member Daoud Kringle and the Doobie Doobie Doo online blog, and it's called Voyagers Chasing Light. And we also, as I mentioned, we do have another Zoom webinar. You can check out the recording where Banning talked about bringing African music into the American music scene. So definitely recommend checking that out on our website. And just real briefly about Banning, for those of you that don't know Banning, he's an author, guitarist, photographer, and senior producer for the Peabody award-winning public radio series Afro Pop Worldwide. His work has taken him to over 25 African countries to research local music, and he has produced over 180 Afro Pop episodes, including in-depth coverage of Mali, Congo, Egypt, Ghana, Madagascar to Nigeria. And he also comments on world music for the NPR's All Things Considered. So we're super excited to have Banning return. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Adam. Appreciate it. And thanks all of you for spending some of your Friday afternoon with me. I should mention that on the subject of bringing African music to the Americas, that there was a kind of a historic event last night at Madison Square Garden. The Nigerian artist Burna Boy, who's won a few Grammys, sold out Madison Square Garden. That is absolutely, without question, the biggest African music concert that has ever happened in the United States. And it was actually broadcast live on YouTube. We did not attend. The tickets were hundreds of dollars. Can you believe that? I mean, it's hard to get people to come out to a free show in Central Park to see some of the great African artists. But the level of popularity of these new artists coming out of particularly Nigeria is just off the charts. It's not like anything I've seen in my 35, 38 years of paying close attention to African music. We are experiencing a absolute tide change, a watershed moment in African music. Now, the music that was actually performed last night, which was very, very impressive, it was an amazing show, but it is very, very far from what I'm going to be talking to you about today, because it's extremely influenced by hip hop and dance hall, and yeah, there's guitar playing in it, but very little of it is really African guitar playing. There's a lot of much more sort of rock guitar playing, and there are you hear some little bits of Congolese guitar in there, here and there, but it really, the music has drifted far away from the guitar focus that it had in the 70s and 80s when we started. I mean, Afropop Worldwide, I'm not going to go over all the things I talked about last time, but we started in 1988, and I first went to Africa with the guitar in 1987 to the two Congos and Zimbabwe and South Africa. And that was kind of where it all started for me, getting into learning these styles. But I'm going to get right to talking about the nuts and bolts of it. The guitar probably came to Africa in, probably the first guitars came to Africa with Portuguese sailors, and this could be as long ago as the 16th century. But the real influx of guitars mostly happened in the 20th century, and a lot around the world wars when Africans went to to Europe and returned with guitars. But before that, what I think of as really one of the first African guitar styles was actually populated or popularized by fishermen, particularly this group, the Kru, who were in Sierra Leone and Liberia, and they were basically hired on to as crews. That's CREW as opposed to KRU, their ethnic identity. But they traveled with guitars, and when they would go to ports, they would play in these sort of drinking establishments, which is why the music came to be known as palm wine guitar. And it's the roots of high life music, which is really the major popular genre of West Africa during the 50s and into the 60s before Congolese music took over. And it's a lovely guitar style. I'm going to play you a piece that that I learned from this guitar style. As I say, has largely disappeared now. There are very few people who play it, but it's really sweet. I mean, and I learned it from this great guitar player in Konimo, who lives in Kumasi, Ghana, in north of Accra, inland, and it's the center of the old Ashanti Empire. And this song is called Yamponsa. It was originally recorded in 1928, and it's been covered millions of times in millions of forms. We actually have a whole podcast on afropop.org about the history of this song. But the way it illustrates an interesting thing about African guitar, which is that it has a lot of the characteristics, especially these early forms, are very influenced by American fingerstyle guitar, but the rhythmic sensibility is really unique. The way it was taught to me, it all is organized around this little bass line. But the thing is, all those notes are actually on the offbeat, so that when the rest of the song comes in, you'll hear. I'm going to try to do this. I'm not going to tap out the beat because it's hard enough to play the thing. Something like that. So that style got around. It went into Ghana and into Nigeria and even as far south because a lot of it had to do with the sort of the movement of colonial labor, and there's a whole history about the various the Spanish, the French, the English, the Portuguese, who they thought were the best laborers, and a lot of times they would take people from one place and bring them to another, and this is how music got around a lot, and um, and the guitar being so portable and so relatively easy to take care of was a really a natural thing to get around. And so one of the places that it went to and underwent a further transformation is in the Congo. And one of the things that's really interesting about when you look at how music travels back and forth across the Atlantic is things resonate based partly on local cultures, but also partly on the language spoken by the colonizers. So you have a real separation between francophone and anglophone countries in terms of what hit home. And one of the examples that I think of is that when you get up to the 70s and people are starting to hear American funk music, in West Africa, where people speak English, and there's probably a stronger connection to the actual Africans who came to America, larger percentage. They heard funk music and James Brown as their music coming home. And this leads to Afrobeat and Fela Kuti and a lot of things that you may know about, the whole sort of reappropriation of funk music in West Africa. Whereas you go south to the Congo, which is what I'm going to talk about next, their point of reference was much more the Spanish Caribbean, Cuba. They were hearing Cuban music, originally circulated on the GV record series, which is really, I think of it as the original world music because it was one of the first musics that really got around like that through vinyl and radio. So they heard Congolese music, no, rather they heard Cuban music and totally recognized themselves in it. They heard Bantu rhythms. They felt like this. They felt the same way that the West Africans felt hearing funk music. Whereas when Congolese people heard funk music, they heard it as American music. They did not hear it as an African music that had gone and come back. This is somewhat oversimplified, but I've done a bunch of interviews about this, and it definitely, there's something there. And of course, really, a lot of it is just about the language that they spoke. And because they didn't really, the people in the Congo did not fully understand the connection of that music to the American Civil Rights Movement. So it didn't have that kind of weight of importance, historical importance that it had in Anglophone countries where people were more aware of that. But anyway, so the point of reference for Congolese musicians was Cuba. And, in Cuba, of course, there's this large inputs of African music from Yoruba culture, Congo culture. That's a whole story unto itself. But it becomes centralized around the idea of the clave rhythm, which exists in many places in Africa. Certainly, it's in high life music, but it really becomes like this very central in the Congolese music. And I mean, I'm just going to give you a little bit of, they called it rumba, which is confusing because rumba means one thing in Spanish flamenco music and one thing in Cuban religious traditional music, Afro-religious music. But in Congo, it means this, it's really more derived from the Cuban style known as son. But a lot of sort of simple chord progressions with that kind of rhythm, like. So let me see, I have this looping pedal, which may or may not be helpful, but I'm gonna try, so here's a clave rhythm. And here's like an accompanying guitar part like that. I'm gonna get a flat pick. here because most of these guitars didn't play fingerstyle like that. They played with a flat pick. Can you hear that? Is that working out? So what happened is, in the 50s, a lot of groups were playing like that with just hand percussion guitars. They started to add horns, but they didn't have pianos, and they started singing in Lingala. At first, they were just singing the Cuban songs, but as time went by, they got more and more. It became more and more Africanized. A lot of these repeating patterns, and it also got faster over time. So by the time you get to the 60s, maybe the late 60s and the 70s, you start to get things more like this. Let's see, I got some empty spaces here. I'm going to find an empty space here. Yeah, here's one. So I'm just going to put down that bass line here. Uh-oh. Somehow it did not work. I guess that was not an empty space after all. Okay. It's been a while since I used this device. I know there's some empty spaces in here somewhere. Okay. All right, let's just clear it. Sorry, I've done too much playing around with this machine. Stop it. And then, yeah, about how to delete this. Sorry. I filled the whole damn thing up. I forgot how to delete things. Terrible here. All right. All right. Well, let's see. What can I do? Maybe I actually have this here somewhere already. Let's see what this one's like. No, it's still too slow. All right. Well, I'm going to demonstrate it without accompaniment here, which is annoying, but I've forgotten how to delete things. So you got this. And the bass would be playing something like. They used to call this marche militaire because it's very kind of strong and aggressive, and it's also imitating the way there's a high and a low line, which is kind of coming from the idea of a hand drum, Congo-like drum, where you have a high and a low part. And then you might have a middle guitar part, something like that. And then there are some very important guitarists who had clever ways of playing very intricate lead over that. One of them was Franco, who had this band TPOK Jazz from 1956 up until his death in must have been about 89, I think. But he was famous for playing this way where you're playing in parallel sixths with a pick and one finger, like. So he would be. And he would play very intricate off rhythms with it, so that his part would really stand out, and that was very influential. And then there were a lot of guys, like the most famous one is Dr. Nico, who over that kind of groove would play much more single line and repeated patterns, and it developed into a system where everybody would change parts based on the drum. The drum would do a roll, and everyone would switch parts. And you'd stay with your part until there was another switch, and they'd be very nicely worked out parts. They really were the guitarists were very competitive, coming up with the most clever parts. But this one isn't necessarily particularly clever, but gives you an idea. So you've got. So if you listen to groups, especially getting into the late 60s, groups like Zyko Langa Langa, it gets very involved. Really, they're very, very articulate, fast pickers, and the patterns are difficult, much more difficult than that. But beautiful, and they have to really flow. It all has to really lock with the middle guitar part and with the bass, because it's dance music. And basically that was the test. If people don't dance to it, then you're fired. We're getting a new guitarist. And it was really tough, man. It's funny because you hear the music and it's very joyful and happy and really uplifting. But behind it, man, I know, because I've worked with these musicians and talked to a lot of them, it was a tough military-like environment and very, very competitive. And if you didn't cut it, you're gone. One guy told me about a band leader who fired his own brother because he just wasn't cutting it. People weren't dancing. But so Congolese music, I'm sorry I can't give it to you in more parts, but you get a bit of an idea of what's going on there. It's really, it becomes the most popular dance music in Africa in the 70s, starting in the 60s, but certainly all the way through the 70s and well into the 80s. It isn't, and even into the 90s, when by that time they were going to Paris, and there's a lot more keyboards and drum machines, and it goes through this whole series of evolutions. It's still very popular music, but it gets overtaken by other styles at a certain point. But it's very interesting, because a lot of the styles that I really have spent a lot of time with and love in places like Mali and Zimbabwe and Madagascar, those styles for a long time, and even to a large degree now, are really only known in their own countries and in neighboring countries that are related culturally. Um, when you get beyond that, people have no idea, and it's partly just the language barrier. Um, that's probably the biggest obstacle. But for some reason, the Congolese music, the way they sang in Lingala, these beautifully arranged harmonies, gorgeous, fantastic singers, um, it just people didn't care about the language anymore. They embraced it, and they kind of had their own version of the success that these Nigerian artists are having now. They were able to speak to the whole continent and well, to a degree, the outside world. Unfortunately, they didn't have the kind of backing that these guys have now. I mean, these guys are rich, and most of the Congolese guys never really got that rich. But Franco did okay. But okay, so all right, now I'm going to switch and go to a really different narrative, which is back to West Africa. But now we're gonna talk about. Well, I learned most of this music in Mali, but there's a history here that goes back to the 12th century when you had the Mande or the Malian Empire that covered. I can't really show you that well, but it's all of this. I mean, the whole interior. What we now have: Mali, Senegal, Guinea-Bissau, Ivory Coast, part of Niger, Burkina Faso. That was all under, for 200 years, it was under one empire, the Mande or Malian Empire. And one of the traditions that probably pre-existed, but that really coalesced at that time, was the tradition of griots. And griots are a little bit hard to pin down as an exact, there's no exact parallel in our world. But because they're master musicians, but they're also historians, people who are responsible for knowing the histories of countries and knowing the histories of not countries, because they didn't have countries, the families and lineages and wars and you know, settlements and a lot of fascinating sort of mythology is mixed in with this too. The first king of the Malian Empire was Sunjata Keita, and he had griots, and the griots they played aside from drums, which they sometimes played, and sometimes they just spoke. There was a form of griotism that's just oratory. They were also negotiators. They would work out arrangements between families when people were getting married or having issues or that sort of thing. So they're a very distinct group of people, and the only way you can become a griot is to be born into a griot family. It's totally hereditary. There's no other way. But they played three melodic instruments: the kora, which you've probably seen, the 21-string harp. It's got two arrays of strings, 21, and they're tuned by leather straps around a very heavy pole that runs right through the gourd resonator, and they so you only have the notes of the scale. It usually either, they use a few different modes: major, minor, Lydian to some degree with the sharp 4. But and then the balafon, which is a wooden xylophone, which also was limited. Although nowadays, guys will have two of them tuned a half step apart so that they can get the in-between notes. But the third instrument is the ngoni, which is a spike lute. It's I should have brought one out, but it's a hollowed out piece of wood with a skin over the body, so it's like a drum, and then doweling neck that runs right through it, which is why they call it a spike lute. And it's fretless, so it can play any notes and do all kinds of, this is where you start to get the influence of Arabic music with microtones and that sort of thing. The ngoni, which exists in many different forms in West Africa and North Africa, is also one of these central griot instruments. And the first real adventure I had in Mali, in Africa, really was when I went and lived for 6 months in Bamako, Mali, living with a great guitarist, Jelimadi Tunkara of the Super Rail Band. And he was a master at playing all the styles of those instruments on guitar. And so I'll give you, and this is this totally changed the way I play guitar. This is where we start to get into techniques that would only exist because Africans are trying to get the sound of a particular instrument on the guitar. And in this case, the way that they do it, pretty much only two fingers picking, thumb and forefinger, but the forefinger isn't tucked around like this, like you'd be in classical or most folk styles. The finger is extended like this and bends only from the knuckle here. I mean, right from the base of the hand. It doesn't do this at all. It's got to be like that because it's like it gives it a certain torque, you know, and it allows notes to jump out. So that's one thing. But the other thing is a lot of hammering on and pulling off to get these kind of waterfall-like cascading effects that you get on the kora or the balafon. So, you know, and then there's this technique, because on the kora, you can play, the notes go back and forth, back and forth. And so you can play a note on one side and stop it, like get that dead sound. And then you can play the note above, a half note, half step approach tone, and let it ring. And it creates this sound. And guitarists came up with that because they wanted to get the sound that it's on the kora. I mean, if you saw it written down, it could just be, but you hear it does not do what it does. So I'm going to play you a little bit of Sunjata, which was the first song Jelimadi taught me. The song for this 13th century king who united the Malian Empire. I've forgotten the intro. Try that again. This is the battle scene with the horses. So the pace picks up. This is a balafon part. A little rusty, but get the idea. Some of those riffs are pretty tricky, and the really amazing. Like I have a CD of this gentleman, Boubacar Badian Jabate, who was just an incredible master at that style. He was a protege of Jelamati, so I recorded him in New York for that CD a few years ago, which is also available on the Lion Songs Records website, which I'll tell you about at the end. But I mean, when you hear a real master of that style, it's it's on a par with any virtuoso guitar playing you can think of. It's just staggering. But in going along with representing these different instruments, I mean, I give you a little bit of balafon part. This interesting thing about the ngoni is, as I said, it can play in between notes. Let's see if I remember this. So that's the kind of stuff you can't do on the kora or the balafon, but you can do it on the guitar. So this is more like a ngoni style. So those are all heptatonic Mande griot pieces that are guitar versions of music from the kora, the balafon, and the ngoni. But there's a bunch of other guitar styles in Mali too, non-griot styles, particularly up in the north. I imagine some of you have been exposed to the great late guitarist Ali Farka Touré, and perhaps his son Vieux Farka Touré, and there's a bunch of other artists now who have international careers coming from the north of Mali, Timbuktu region, and they play a style that resonates very easily with American ears because it uses pentatonic scales, and it's often compared to blues music and thought to be, among the origins of blues music. That's a whole interesting discussion. But the way those guys play, they tune the low G string, a low E string up, minor third. they'll use a lot of they use a lot of sort of drone effects. It's not chords at all. It's all about lines against a drone pedal, and they'll use different. They use 3 different pentatonic scales. First, the major one. They have similar fingerstyle, but now we're dealing with pentatonic scales. And the ones that are in the major pentatonic, they sound like folk songs. There's things like. Then there's the minor pentatonic scale, which is the one that sounds most like blues. A lot of these riffs. Lots of songs in that vein. And then the third one they use, I refer to as a Dorian pentatonic scale because it's basically playing off the second note of what would be a major scale. And what's great about it is it doesn't have any third, so it's neither major nor minor. And this is the one that a lot of the most beautiful, sort of mysterious, desert-like songs are in this mode. So let's see if I can remember slipped my mind. I haven't had enough sleep this week. It should be there. It usually pops right out, but oh, here we go. that. There's millions of wonderful polyfarcatoria songs along those lines. So lots to dig into there. All right, continuing on our guitar tour of Africa. I'm going to make a brief stop in South Africa, which is, there's a lot of really cool South African styles that these I'm not as familiar with, but the one that I really like is Zulu fingerstyle guitar, which turned into a pop music called maskanda, where they put heavy drums behind it, and it's really joyful but strong, tough music. But a lot of it's based on it comes from in South Africa, a lot of places, but certainly there, people had to walk long distances because, you know, I mean, going back before colonial times, but certainly even during colonial times, and one of the things that they had this thing called walking songs that they would sometimes play with a mouth bow, which is sort of like a berimbau, if you can think of that Brazilian instrument. It's like a bent piece of wood with a single string that you tap, and you put it in at the edge of your teeth so that you can kind of like shape your mouth and change the notes. But the thing about it is that it's totally insistent. It's got this pulse, you know. This is a guitar version that was taught to me by the late Johnny Clegg, who was a British South African guy who sort of immersed himself in Zulu culture and became very good at a lot of Zulu arts. But he taught me this back in 1987. Oh, actually, there's a tuning thing here. I'm supposed to tune. It's you really have to get into the groove of that. Yeah, you tune down the high string a half step there. And there are some really beautiful songs in that repertoire too. I've actually gone back to some of those tapes and been relearning some of those things. This is a more complicated one. I'll see if I can pull this off. There's lovely singing that goes with that too. These very high, lonesome melodies. You know, it's really beautiful music, and but it's always got that pulse, but they put a heavy bass behind it, and it really pops. It's really exciting music. And yeah, Johnny Clegg kind of fused that with English rock and had this various groups, but the first one that happened during apartheid was called Zulu, and they would have their concerts closed down all the time because it was white and black musicians playing together. And yeah, it has a lot of great stories about that, some of which you can find on YouTube. They're worth checking out. So, okay, now heading. How are we doing with time? I don't have any idea what time it is. But, okay, well, all right. I'll go a little further. I have to talk to you about Zimbabwe because that's a place I've spent a lot of time learning. Again, a style of guitar that comes from the imitation of an African instrument. And let's see, what's the best way to demonstrate this? Oh yeah, I'll start with my fingerstyle version of it. The mbira, it's often referred to as a thumb piano. It's a lamellophone would be the musicological term for it. It is it's a hard slab of wood with these metal tongues attached to it, and they're organized in a way. There's one high array on one side that goes scale-wise, but the lower notes are in two arrays, and unlike the kora, it's not any sort of normal logic. You have to really learn it because the notes are not in order. But it plays this music that's used in spirit possession ceremonies. So it's very repetitive, cyclic music, and it always repeats in a pattern. Or most of the time, 4 phrases that repeat and never resolve. So it just goes around and round, and it's like. So those would be the 4 phrases. And this can be thought of as chord progressions. Guitar players have thought of it that way because it makes it easier to understand, but mbira players don't think of it that way. But okay, so here's how it might go. What happens is often it will start in that kind of waltz-like feeling, but then, and one of the things that makes it sort of a natural kind of trance music that would lead to possession is that the rhythm gets complicated by becoming a polyrhythm where it's both in 6 and 4 at the same time. So you start with. But the 3 is still there, like listen to the bass. Okay, this is me putting my sort of West African folky fingerstyle thing into it. But the way they play this music is mostly multiple guitars using flat picks. And I tried this during the sound check and it wasn't hugely successful, but I'm going to give it a shot anyway because I've got into this looping pedal here. Like, okay, I think this is even in the same key. So instead of playing these chords, you play a line. This is a song called Pidigori. It's a traditional song. So again, 4 phrases, but now the 4 phrases are lines. So here they are. and then to make it more complex and mbira-like, a second guitar would play something like this. And then the bass, because often the bass is on the mbira, it's not playing the downbeats. It's actually because you've only got two thumbs and one finger playing, and you've got a lot of melody going on. So the bass lines often come in after the beat, and this is a bass player's version of getting that effect. This is the bass part. So you get all that going, and then the lead player has more freedom and can play stuff like this. And so on. So if you want to dig into that, you have to listen to the music of Thomas Mapfumo and the Blacks Unlimited. I spent about 20 years going back and forth from Zimbabwe and traveling with that band here and playing with them and learning from the various guitar players. And I wrote a book about Thomas and the whole history of Zimbabwe called Lion Songs, and that became the name of this little record label that I have now, Lion Songs Records. And it's incredibly rich music. The mbira is really just one part of it. There are a lot of different interesting guitar styles in Zimbabwe. There are variants on the Congolese stuff where they're not so much locked into the clave rhythm, but they still have this interactive guitar effect, and they have this kind of country music called sungura, which I'm not going to demonstrate it for you now because I have a couple of pieces, but I'd have to practice them. but it's really lively, fun music, dance music. But the mbira stuff is particularly rich to me because the songs are incredibly beautiful, and there's a core repertoire, kind of like with the Malian stuff. One of the things that I love about the Malian Mande music and the Shona and mbira music in Zimbabwe is that there's this core repertoire. It's almost like jazz, you know. If you meet musicians, you're going to know a bunch of songs in common because everybody knows this core repertoire. And everybody plays them differently, and there's a lot of room for personal expression. So it's really nice social music, you know. Whenever I meet mbira players, I can play with them because for sure I know a bunch of songs that they do, and similarly with kora players, and that's actually one of the things that really has been so much fun about this whole thing. Okay, the last thing I'm going to talk about, because time is running out, is Madagascar. This wonderful island over here, right? You can see it, and it's the size of California, and it's sitting between Africa and the Pacific. And it has this fascinating history of roughly half of the genome of Madagascar is East African. The other half is Austronesian, meaning coming from that whole complex of islands, Polynesia, Indonesia. And that's a really fascinating mix. It leads to totally unique instruments, totally unique rhythms and styles, and it's terrific music. One, this is a piece that I wrote in a sort of Madagascar style. One of the things they do a lot is now they're playing with 3 fingers and a lot of stuff parallel thirds. Things like that. They have string instruments that are not like the kora exactly, but they're like the kora in the sense that it's 2 fingers playing, and they love that parallel third sound. A lot of very beautiful music along those lines. But another thing that's really striking about a lot of the music in Madagascar is it's fast 12/8 music, and it's and where they hear the downbeat is strange. So often they're really accenting the second partial of the triplet. So it's 2/3, 2/3, 2/3, and it creates this wonderful atmosphere. But anyway, so this is a song that I wrote kind of trying to get at that feeling. it the second time around. You get that tricky part in the middle. So, I think maybe in the time we have left, take some questions. Does anyone have any questions or input of any sort?
Yeah, Danny,
Yeah.
are you you said you had a CD with your, are you finding that because I guess there's a big following with that African, because I've been playing guitar for years and I haven't played the closest thing I get to African is Jonathan Butler, who's
Oh yeah. Yeah.
he's
Jazz.
right.
Yeah.
He's from Africa, but
South Africa.
plays, and so I'm not familiar with it, but I guess, are you trying to make that more popular in the New York area? Are you in New York?
Well, I play in New York quite a lot. I live in Connecticut, but yeah, I mean, I've been sort of on a mission for years to, I'd say the audience for the kinds of music that I've been playing here is small but devoted.
Right.
There are people who really go nuts for it. I think the Malian stuff is the most popular. Particularly the northern Ali Farka Touré kind of stuff that has a pretty strong constituency. The further you get, I mean, it's an interesting thing I find that the further away you get from the actual history of Africans who came to America during the slave trade, the harder it is for people to hear things like the Zimbabwean and the Madagascar rhythms. The audiences for those musics are smaller. I think that when we hear a lot of that West African music and the Congolese music, people who are familiar with Latin music immediately feel something familiar in it. And in West African stuff, especially the bluesy stuff or the funky stuff out of Fela Kuti, where it's all these kind of like this really funky bass line behind it. We get that more easily. These more sort of folkloric, intricate styles. I'm certainly on a mission to make people turn on to this music, and we play a lot of it and talk to a lot of these artists on Afropop Worldwide. By the way, if any of you guys are not familiar with afropop.org, our website, you should be, because it's a tremendous resource. You can find, we have like hundreds of hour-long radio documentaries about all different kinds of African music, but certainly a lot of this kind of stuff. It's been an interest of mine since the beginning. So yeah, I think I don't know, I find it to be, I played a lot of different kinds of music when I was younger. I played jazz, I played classical, flamenco, rock, reggae, all these things. But when I started hitting these styles, that was really it for me. That's what I wanted to play. So.
Okay. You said that was afropop.org?
Afropop.org, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yes.
Because like you said, today everything is jazz / hip hop. They even call it chill hop. You got chill hop, neo soul. My album myself is contemporary jazz. So I'm kind of like,
I love that stuff too.
with the modern sound, So the stuff like that is going to be new, although it's been around probably a long time. It's going to be new to a lot of people. So
that's for sure. And when people hear, a master kora player or an mbira ensemble or some of these incredible West African guitars, it's often a revelation. I mean, people really, the music's not had. I mean, it's not really ever had serious industry support. Probably the highlight was the mid 80s up to, the late 80s up into the mid 90s. There were a lot of record companies releasing this stuff. There were a lot of tours. It was easier to tour then. There wasn't so many problems with visas, and artists were really hungry, and there were lots of people who were really excited about it and thought they were going to find the next Bob Marley, and there was a lot of activity. But it's been much rougher since then until, as I mentioned at the beginning, this new wave of these artists. But they're, you know, you go check out Burna Boy on YouTube. You'll get the picture quite quickly. It's a far cry from this. It's very interesting music. It's kind of a mixture of dance hall, but softer, and it's got clave rhythms in it. You know, the highlight, that rhythm runs through all of it, which makes it, that separates it from hip hop and dance hall. It's
Banning.
Yep.
Yeah, I got a question for you. First of all, thank you. I have two questions. Thank you for doing this. It's really a treat to have you sharing your wealth of knowledge to us. The first question was, just after you're talking about the griots, you played a style. I wasn't taking notes or anything, but you were playing a style that sounded so much like kora that I was wondering if that style actually was like the guitar style came from the kora, and basically that's how they evolved the guitar part through kora. Was that
Absolutely. This first things like this, but also the going down in triplets.
Yes.
That's all. Yeah, that's totally core. And also, when you get to when I was playing,
Yeah.
it's kind of high drone like this. That's all totally coming off core. Yeah.
So then I imagine historically they were wherever this style came from, they were originally playing a kora, and someone introduced a guitar into the stream, and
that probably started happening even in the 20s and 30s, but it really came to fore around the time of independence, when 1960 or so, when the states started forming bands that were organized to bring about national unity. And so they would sponsor bands in the various regions, and then they would have these biannual competitions to find the best ones. And those guys were mixing Mande kora type music with the pentatonic stuff, with other influences, Latin music, reggae eventually, and creating really wonderful fusions of music. I mean, there's a thing that happens where it starts as imitation, but then it becomes its own thing. I mean, it happened with the Congolese music. It's happening now with this Afro beats music like Burna Boy. You know, the stuff they were doing 10 years ago just sounded like they were trying to rip off, American hip hop artists and dancehall artists. But now it's come into its own. It's kind of crystallized as a genre, like reggae. I mean, you look at the history of reggae, there are all these things that lead up to it, but when it becomes reggae, suddenly it's this very exportable thing that you can identify, and it goes all over the world. So there are lots of sort of micro histories like that in African music.
yeah, that reminds me. Another thing was from your experience in Mali. I wonder if you're familiar with. Last night I was in Brooklyn at BAM for the Bang on the Can All Stars,
Nice.
doing Terry Riley's in C, and there was a Mali version of Terry Riley's in C done by Africa Express. Are you familiar with them?
I've heard of Africa Express, yeah, but I'm not sure what sort of genres they come from. Is Africa? Oh, well, there's an Africa Express in the UK, but they weren't from the UK though.
No, this had it was produced by a filmmaker who sort of shot streetscapes of Mali, while this, and interspersed with the live performance of the Mali version of NC with balalaika. I'm not what are those mallet instruments that are?
A balafon.
Balafons, yeah, balafon and mbiras, and it was just a gorgeous version, and this, you can find it on YouTube.
I'll check it out, because I mean, in C, it's a natural thing, because a lot of those things are very, you know, there's not a lot of harmonic movement. It's all about being in a zone, you know, and creating this
Yeah.
atmosphere. And if you start, you know, throwing in fancy chord changes or modulating or whatever, you just spoil the whole atmosphere, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Well, thank you again. It was really wonderful. Thank you.
thank you.
Benning, I have a question. As you know, I'm always interested in the core of something, the roots. So in your case, when you play African music, have you reached a limit in your playing where you say, I can't go deeper into African music because I'm not African?
Well, I would say there is a limit, definitely, but I would say that the more I work at things, the deeper I get. You know, there was a great expression about that that I used to encounter when I lived in Mali, which was, you know, because it's on a river, and there's a lot of crocodiles in the river, and the expression was, no matter how long a piece of wood floats in the water, it will never become a crocodile. You know, the idea being that it might look like a crocodile, but it's never going to become one. And that was kind of, for me, it was like just kind of a mantra of, you know, you can work as hard as you want, but you're never really going to be that thing. And that's why, I mean, these days I write a lot of my own music, and it has bits and pieces of the stuff in it, but it's not trying to be, you know, authentic. You know, it never can be. I mean, if I get the chance to play with a very traditional group, you know, I'll do my best to fit in and play by the rules of the tradition, you know. But uh, but yeah, I mean, it's an impossible task, but that's part of what makes it interesting, you know.
Benny, if I could ask, I'm sorry, I'm a little hoarse. I'm tail end of COVID here, but
Sorry.
the pitched instrument traditions in Africa, you at one point referred to the 12th century.
Yeah.
So things like the kora or other pitched instruments, that history goes back that far.
Yeah, definitely. Certainly the ngoni, the balafon, and the kora go back. I mean, I think the kora is probably the most recent one. I don't know that there's really hard, um, you know, knowledge about when exactly it was. I mean, I've heard debates about it. It's definitely at least that far back. And the balafon was the first one. That really. No, I should say the balafon was the central one in the Sunjata story. The griot for Sunjata played the balafon, but the ngoni, that spike lute, I mean, that goes way back. I think that's really one of the first plucked string instruments, you know, you're going to find anywhere. The variants of that, you know, that idea of the spike lute and the drum and the body being not a box but a drum. And you know, those instruments writ large are clearly and without any question the ancestor of the banjo, because that idea of the drum body came with Africans to America, and there's a very clear progression from gourd banjos to minstrel banjos to the modern banjos that we have today. It's fascinating history, but the original instrument that goes way back. I don't think anyone really knows how far, but
and the tuning system, generally speaking, I mean, they're pentatonic derivatives, but the sort of the master scale, in essence, is more or less. You know, someone was talking about the Terry Riley's C major. Essentially, the diatonic major scale is kind of the root pitch system.
there are different ones. The Mande one is diatonic scale, but they can put in those passing notes, not micro notes, but passing notes. But then when you go further north, you find essentially the same instrument. I mean, it can be anywhere between 1 and 7 strings. There's 3-string versions, there's 4-string versions. Often in the ones with more strings, the highest note is in the bass position, which is like, again, like a 5-string banjo. But but yeah, the more you get into the places that have more Arabic and Islamic influence, the more you're going to find microtonalities and stranger, sounds. Um, those guys also, for some time now, they've really loved to hook those little. I mean, there's little instruments like this, and they hook it up to, a guitar amp and a fuzz pedal and play this Hendrix-like stuff. It's just wild. It's raw and raucous, and and the combination of that fuzz tone and the sort of percussive nature of the notes because of the drum body, and then throwing in all these microtones. It's just really, it sends chills down your spine. Some of that stuff in places like Niger and I guess Algeria and Libya, we don't hear much from them. Niger, there's a lot of great music coming out of Niger. There's a label and website called Sahel Sounds, very worth checking out. A guy in Portland, Oregon, who's been really dedicated to that kind of music, and puts out a lot of digital releases. I mean, he has a huge catalog. You can really get a sense of some.
But this stuff is mostly North African. It's above the Sahara.
Yeah, his thing is the Sahel. It's northern Mali, and Niger and Mauritania and places like that, especially Niger.
And the situation where you had the two bellophones, I think you said, where they would be.
Oh yeah.
Essentially that would fill in the notes of a chromatic scale, more or less.
Yeah, that came from a guy named Keletigi Jabate, who's passed now, but he was a hotshot musician in Mali in the 60s and 70s, and he actually once came to America and toured with Lionel Hampton. Somebody had this idea.
Hope he got paid.
And that, I hope he did too, but that was where he got the idea that, hey, man, I want to play these in-between notes. So he was the one who said, hey, make me a balafon that's a half step different, and then I'll have all the in-between notes. And nowadays, lots of guys do that, but he was the one who started it.
Well, the guitar is obviously an in-between notes instrument by nature, but I was just, so much of what we have heard based on our very limited exposure, it's very major scale kind of oriented, and you mentioned the distortion pedal, but a lot of it is very clean.
Yeah, mostly it is. There are some exceptions. There's a tradition in Mauritania. The griots of Mauritania are much less exposed. They're much more inclined to stay within their own tradition, not tour the world or make records or stuff. But there's one group that's gone around quite a bit, and I've met the guitarist, and he showed me that what they do is they remove these high frets here and put them down here in between so they can get microtones. And that is really interesting music too. There's an artist called Nora Mitsemali, who has a bunch of records out, or at least 3 records out, and you hear that, and it's an incredible sound.
I think the Turkish saz is fretted like that, I believe.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, it's all coming from the East, that sensibility of microtones. So yeah, that's a whole other sort of overlay.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very, very much.
Okay.
Banning, I've got so many questions, but I'll just try and two to throw at you. One is when you talk about the guitarists picking up traditional instruments and sort of transcribing or transposing what they're doing, like kora, obviously. Do you think part of that might have been so that they can get around whatever restrictions there might have been to becoming a successful musician in the authentic sound? It's like, or was it just kind of experimenting, or were there some other stuff going on there?
Well, there are some. I mean, well, for me, it's really interesting the way the Malians, the Mande, and just the Malians in general, very, very much embraced the guitar and did not have any problem bringing it into their traditional settings. It just became a new traditional instrument for them. And I think that people, younger musicians probably were gravitated towards the guitar, started playing the Ngoni or particularly the Ngoni, which a lot of Ngoni players then go to guitar and play both, because there's more stuff you can do with the guitar and that kind of thing. But I don't think it's exactly it's not really about getting around sort of cultural restrictions. You do get that. Well, I was just going to contrast that with Zimbabwe, with the mbira, where at those spirit possession ceremonies, nobody's going to be playing a guitar. You know, they would say nobody's ever going to get possessed listening to a guitar. You know, they had much more of an attitude that, okay, that's there, but that's not the real tradition. So for them, it was a more uncomfortable relationship in the world of traditional artists. There's a great example of, there's an instrument called kamalingoni, which is kind of like a kora, but less strings and pentatonic. And it goes back to the dosongoni. Doson is a hunter. This is, now we're talking Mali and southern part of Mali mostly, and into Ivory Coast. And there's a region there where they have this, and the hunters have really deep spiritual lore, because they were going back to hunter-gatherer days, they were the ones who would venture forth and find out what's happening in other places. And, they were seen as people with a kind of mystical power. And there was a lot of restrictions around that instrument: who could play it, who could hear it, when it could be played. And, at a certain point in the 60s, some young people just got tired of that, and they just made a smaller version of the instrument, tuned higher, and they called it kamalingoni, which means a young person's harp. And this whole new genre took off based on that. It's music called Zulu music, which you hear a lot of it, and it's a really lively, cool music, pentatonic, funky rhythms. It's a much deeper sound than the kora, but not as deep as the dosongoni. But anyway, there's an artist called Umu Sangare who has wonderful, wonderful albums that feature that instrument.
Yeah.
But there it was a deliberate attempt to get around traditional strictures.
So it does happen. My other question, real quick, talk about Madagascar and Malagasy 6/8. It's so popular there. The other country where, interestingly enough, it's like super popular is Persia. Like, all the traditional Persian music seems to be 6/8. A lot of it is, and that's weird. I wonder if, it's like one of these Kon-Tiki things, like, how does it, why in those two places, because it's not that common.
Anytime I encounter 6/8 or 12/8, sometimes it feels more like 12/8 to me. It's like a 4, but there are so many interesting variations of that in Africa. But I was recently in French Polynesia, and I heard some songs that had that rhythm too, and I was really struck by that and asked some questions about it. I didn't really learn too much about why or where, because their music is so hybridized. I mean, it could have come from anywhere. But yeah, it is really interesting that rhythm does not. I mean, to American ears have more trouble with that rhythm. They don't. A lot of Southern and East African and like Zimbabwean and Madagascar music, and they dance like crazy to it. But when they come here and play for Americans, they seem much more confused about how to dance to it. But yeah, I personally am a real devotee of 6/8 and 12/8, partly just because of that great. You have so much possibility of which rhythms you want to bring forward, and something like mbira music, where you get both happening at the same time. That's really just so much fun. I mean, it's challenging to be able to be comfortable with that. But there are some genres, some styles where I've broken through those barriers, and it's a great feeling. I mean, I really enjoy that.
Yeah, I'll sneak one more question in, which is, did you ever get to the bottom of, like, that some people said Ali Farka Touré would get sort of upset if people would say that some of the pentatonic scales he was playing were, oh, that sounds just like John Lee Hooker, or it's very bluesy, and he would say, no, it's not. It's indigenous.
Well, it's complicated. I mean, he did hear John Lee Hooker, and he did, he was exposed to that, but the music that the traditional music of northern Mali is already a lot like that, and so it's hard to tell which, it's a chicken and egg situation, but what Ali really objected to was being told that that, you know, the traditional music of his region was the roots or the origins of the blues, because that suggested somehow that it was this kind of like primitive music that had evolved into this grand style, you know, whereas he saw it completely the other way around. He saw it as this incredibly rich tradition that had kind of echoed in this sort of degraded way in America, where instead of singing about history and nature and spiritual things, they were singing about, you know, love lives and drinking, and you know, and you know, to him that was just like kind of trashy, you know. And the idea that his music was being presented as the origins of that was just all backwards to him. I think that was the thing he really objected to.
Thank you. I always love your presentations. It's fantastic. Thank you.
Good. Well, if you want to check out some of this music, go to Lion Songs Records and check out some of the stuff we have there. It's sort of out of focus, isn't it? But lionssongsrecords.com, you can pick up some music and things there. There's even a book about that teaches basic lessons in a bunch of African guitar styles. Okay.
Sean, can you do me a favor? Could you introduce Sean Barlow to us, your buddy, and
Yeah, he's watching upstairs.
Okay. Because you talked about Afropop, so he's
he was the founder.
Yes.
He's the one who got me into all of this. We went to Wesleyan University right here in Middletown, Connecticut together many years ago. And back in 1984, he went over to London and was staying at the home of a guy who was really tuned into all this stuff, a radio guy. And he made a cassette with music from like Congo and West Africa and South Africa, and had the first Zimbabwean music I ever heard, electric Zimbabwean music, Thomas Mafumo, and I played that cassette until it was just, you know, shredded. And that was kind of the beginning. And then he started the radio show in 1980. First went on the air October 1988, so it'll be 35 years next year. And I went on that first trip, and the rest is history, you know. So
maybe we should have a talk about Afropop in the near future as part 4, part 5, I don't know, with you. So, because I have a lot of respect for Afropop. I mean, you are revolutionary. I mean, also very diligent and committed to something that is far away and trying to make Americans familiar with kind of culture. So I have a lot of respect for what you have done. So
it's been a journey, and we're at kind of crossroads now, because as I say, the music is changing so much. We're really looking for younger people to kind of get involved and carry it forward in tune with all the changes that are coming.
Well, I hope that with your work and your involvement in MFM, that in the near future we can get African musicians in our organization, because I think Africa needs unions in each country on that continent, universal union, because through experience, I know it's hard, very hard for African musicians to live from music. And most of them go even to France or to London or come to America, but still, you know. New York, yeah. And still things are not going the right way. So
no, very hard.
Yeah, I know. So I just want to let people know that.
Thank you, Esther. I heard that.
Yes. So we have other world members in our community, like Sylvain Leroux on the Fuller flute, who has also a non-profit.
Yeah.
So I will invite him very soon. We had Royal Hartigan, who has done.
Oh, he's amazing. Yeah.
So he was with us. We have Arturo Farrell on the Latin side. So I hope that more and more various genres are featured in our organization and also to the public, which should help us to get and come together, because the main idea of MFM and all these events is really to unite musicians. We are a fragmented community, and it shouldn't be like that. So a jazz musician should be able to sit to a heavy metal musician or to a punk or to an African musician, you know. So this is my dream of this journey I do. So Richard.
Yeah, Sarah, remember, I think if more of us reach out, Arturo O'Farrell did say in an email that probably sometime after June that he should be joining us. So I'm gonna email him around that time, and hopefully he'll be able to keep his word on that. But if more of us do, like, you know, reach out, I think some of these guys will get involved.
That's good. Thank you for this effort. It's always good that members reach out to our VIPs to make them come and speak and teach and play, whatever, you know. So, because I mean, all the musicians, like in the recording academy called the Grammys, and so they should be also involved in what the MFM and other organizations are doing, you know. So good. So I think the time has come. Adam, would you like to say something to round we got longer than ever?
No, I don't have it was great session, and thanks to everybody that could make it. Yeah, so and if you're not a member of MFM, if you're just a guest, go to the website, musiciansformusicians.org, and join our organization. We get access to lots of recordings and on business of music, and lots more benefits as well. So go ahead and check out at musiciansformusicians.org.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you all, and have a great weekend.
Thanks, Benning.
See y'all later.
Benning, fantastic.
All right.
Thank you very much. That was great, really.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.